Well, welcome everyone. It's good to have you on board with the Global Kingdom Conversation, where we meet each Thursday at the same time. And this is an offering. We are a collective offering that we're offering to the Lord on this call. And this isn't a performance. It's not an average call. As you weigh the content and you hear the things that are coming across, particularly today, you'll see that there's an aim and a desire that we have to really benefit and to really serve the body of Christ in a special and unique function. So it's great to have you that are here present with us today. And also we'd like to include our invisible audience who is just as near to us as ever. You receive the recordings each week. It's good to have you aboard as well. Well, we're going to get right into our session today. We have Anderson Williams with us that's going to kind of steer us along and give us some insights on and some navigation into which way we'll be going today. So it's good to have you aboard. Welcome, Anderson. Good to have you aboard today.
Well, good evening, everyone. I hope that you all are doing well. Okay, good. We good. Hope that everyone is doing well. We have several things that we want to get done today. We know other people will be jumping onto this call as we go forward. But what I want to do today is something that we should have done maybe about a month ago. But I'm going to do today just to identify some of the broad objectives of this call. A couple of weeks ago, we kind of we redesigned some of the offerings on this particular platform. We said that we want to try as best as we can to move away from just the traditional platform that we call a talk shop, where we just talk and open up for little dialogue. I mean, even the current platform of us speaking and little dialogue is in fact a big departure from the accustomed model. But for some odd reason, I still think that we have not yet touched the real frequency. So we're trying as best as we can to adjust some of the things that we're doing. So we broke our operations into 3 particular segments. We said we're going to have a tutorial Thursday. The tutorial Thursday is where we teach and then we open up for some interaction and dialogue. And we said that we would be very deliberate in speaking in a particular way. Then we talked about occasionally we'll have a line. I described the context and the arrangement of the line. It's a very spontaneous interaction. It is unrehearsed, but we'll be dealing with real significant topics that will be beneficial to any listener on this call and anybody else who gets a hold of it. We've had 2 limes already on this platform, both of which I found to be quite significant, and the feedback proved to be quite useful. The other thing we talk about is having what we call a Pack Thursday. From time to time, we'll have a Pack Thursday. A Pack Thursday will be a combination of practicums, activations, and case studies. For that, we'll have to kind of formulate some teams, and there are some people I have in mind to kind of from time to time, and if we do this right, we could have about 1 Thursday a month where we could break up into groups and deal with some real important issues. And in breaking up into groups, we will allow for even a greater level of personal sharing, trust building, because on the bigger platform, people might still feel a bit insecure and unsure, and so they don't want to speak. But we really want to get out of where one person speaks, everybody listens, and then they disappear. So we're trying to do that. So what I want you to understand inside of it is that, listen, we don't have all of the answers. And so your feedback, your input is critically important. And so if you have ideas in ways that we can make this offering even more useful, then please share the ideas. You're dealing not with an esoteric model here, where a few persons at the top assume that they have all the solutions. We don't subscribe to that particular model. Your contribution and your involvement is very, very important. Today, we have several things that we want to do. Frederick Tobin would be speaking today primarily, but before Frederick comes on, I want to kind of list 8 objectives for this particular call. Some of you jump on here week after week. Some could make it, some can't make it. And we know that not every single one of you will be here every single Thursday. I mean, we do have quite a number of persons and quite a number of nations represented when everyone jumps on the call. But we want to at least identify why we are here. And then secondly, I want to give you a sense as to what we're doing next week. Thirdly, I want also to have Ivan. Ivan has a friend that he has brought to the call this evening. So maybe Ivan, before I jump into these eight reasons or these 8 concepts, maybe I could turn the mic over to you, Ivan, and you could take some time and introduce a guest this evening, and then we could hear a little bit from him, and then we could go forward. Yeah, Ivan, shoot, you there?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Yeah, I have the privilege of introducing you all to David Emechete. I think I'm saying that right, David. You can correct me when you get ready to speak. I got to know David through Dayo, who's based in Nigeria. And Dayo just sponsored a Organic Kingdom Community conference last weekend. And I jumped on and I listened to both Dayo and David speak. And I was struck by how clear David articulates the realities of the relationship with Jesus and the kingdom and the ecclesia. And I thought this brother, it would be great to have him come on and share this time with us and listen and learn and also share. So I've never met him personally. We've spoke and chatted on initially on Facebook, and then we connected to talk a little bit about some additional things. I read one of his books called Sabbath Rest, which really was the clearest articulation of the rest that we find in Jesus. And the reason that was so important to me is because I came out of a religious environment that really emphasized the seventh day being the Sabbath and focused on a 24-hour period. And I had transitioned away from that into resting in Jesus. And I was just intrigued by the title of his book and started to read it, couldn't put it down. It was a fast read. And I reached out to him and just said it was really, really good. So welcome, David. Why don't you share a little bit about who you are and where you're based, and with our friends here on the call.
Okay. Thank you for that. I wasn't expected. I didn't know I was going to be introduced. Okay. I'm David Emechete, and I've been on this journey also learning about the kingdom of God and the ecclesia. And when Evan reached out to me, and we started sharing about the kingdom and about other brethren who are also teaching the same thing. And then invited me, he mentioned this meeting, and then invited me. And I was like, oh, wow, I would love that. Because there's nothing I love talking about more than Jesus and what he's doing and the kingdom is building. Amen. Okay, that's all I would say.
Okay, David, very good. Very good to have you on the call, man. Very, very good to have you. Make yourself very much at home here. Okay, guys, let me mention what we're going to do next week. Next week, we're going to have a lime, and we know what a lime is. I don't need to go through all of the details of that. But I'm sure that every single one of us would have gone through life and we've had some level of pain, some level of hurt. Those hurts could be caused by all kinds of circumstances. And maybe you've had very close friends or family who would have died from maybe some terminal disease that would have affected you. Or maybe there's some level of inconsistency within your orbit that if an outsider looks in, it is easy for them to more or less delegitimize you. That's an important point. There might be areas of inconsistencies or apparent inconsistencies that if an outsider looking in and identify those apparent inconsistencies, it's very quick for them to delegitimize you. And so we all have some situations like that. We all are dealing with some level of inconsistency, and when we all engage in cleaning up and fixing and amending and perfecting our existence in God, not a single one of us on this call or anywhere else can celebrate absolute perfection. I've always said, if any man claims to be absolutely perfect, that is a man who's worthy of being run away from. And so if you think about God, if God, the creator of all things, Elohim, were to be the average pastor in the average church today, we can easily delegitimize them. You know why? He had a family that was a bit dysfunctional because he had a son that literally put the whole world in a tailspin, the whole earth in a tailspin. After creating the perfect environment, providing everything necessary for his son's well-being, both spiritual and physical and otherwise, that son turned around and became an absolute sinner. That son was having conversations with the devil. That son threw all of humanity into chaos. Is God then dysfunctional because of an apparent inconsistency? I use the word apparent. How do we deal when there are apparent inconsistencies in our own lives? And so next week, we'll be having an open conversation, unrehearsed. And so join the conversation next week, join the line next week as we talk about some of these issues and dealing with issues of personal hurt, managing and working through areas of serious pain where maybe a loved one, a close family member, a brother, a sister, a literal brother or sister, maybe parents, maybe mommy or daddy, maybe a son or a daughter must have died as you were trying to manage a whole process. How do you deal with that? So join the conversation next week. We're having a line. And if you think that there's anybody who could benefit from that line, please let them join the conversation. So that's enough for some of those basic information. Let's now walk through what I would describe as objectives for this conversation. Now, at the end, we will take these principles and we'll have it in a nice little page and send it out to you. And so you'll be able to go through it. The reason why we're sending it out to you is because we want you to hold us accountable to these principles. And the reason why I want you to hold us accountable is because we don't just want to use nice, flashy statements that sounds all wonderful and exaggerated. But at the end of the day, we want you to say to us, listen, these are things that you said you'll be committed to, but can you help us to see it more? Can you walk us through it? What we don't want is if you are, for any reason, offended by us not rolling them out as quickly as you would like, you get offended and you run away. While we don't have any form that you have to sign to be a part of this conversation, what we expect is good manners and good behavior, particularly if you have gelled in a particular manner with a certain sector or segment of this particular call. And so if for some odd reason you say, well, you know what, I don't particularly like what Anderson is saying, and then you just jump off the call and begin to create gossip and confusion, that is not an ethical issue. That is not an ethical way to deal with stuff. I mean, give me a call. I'm very, very open, and I'm equal to being corrected by any single one of you wherever I drift or stray in any aspect of my life, my doctrine, my manner, my behavior, okay? So let's talk about these objectives very quickly. And before we get into the meat of it, let me quickly give you a scripture here. This is John chapter 1, verses 19 to 23. This is the Good Word translation. Listen. This was John's answer when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, who are you? John didn't refuse to answer. He told them clearly, I'm not the Messiah. They asked him, well, are you Elijah? John answered, I am not. Then they asked, are you the prophet? He replied, no, I'm not. So they asked him, who are you? Tell us so that we can take an answer back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself? John said, I am a voice crying in the wilderness. The point I want you to understand is people ask John, who exactly are you? What are you here for? What is the reason for your existence? And John started by identifying what he was not. Before he told them what he was, the first thing he identified is what he's not. And then he told them what he is. I am not, but this is what I am. So in order for us to explore the reason for this conversation, let us first of all talk about what we are not. And I'm going to quickly walk through this, but I'm going to do this very, very quickly because I do want to give Frederick significant amount of time to drill into some of the concepts that he has to share with us today. So what are we not? Number one, we have no intention, we have absolutely no intention of making this a network or any of the current iterations of exclusive esoteric enclaves. Now, network is a spent force. Whatever you want to call it, networks, denominations, a cluster of human beings where they are controlled and manipulated by some religious overlord, however you describe it. I describe it as an exclusive esoteric enclave. Esoteric meaning only a few people are allowed to exist in that particular space. Few can be thousands, few can be millions, but it's still few because it does not allow for other people of different views, of different persuasions to be a part of that dynamic. It is a locked up environment where people just are inside of an echo chamber, seeing themselves in a house of mirrors. And so we join this conversation week after week, and I want you to dismiss from your mind the idea that Anderson Williams is the apostolic leader of this particular grouping. I am not. This is not a network. This is not some kind of religious framework. This is not a controlled environment where we are manipulating people in order to arrive at our own objective. So what we are not a network, and we have no intentions of becoming one. Neither do we intend to become any of the current iterations of exclusive esoteric enclaves. What are we not? This platform does not seek to siphon monies from you to enrich any person's indulgences. We have never asked for offerings. We've never asked you to pay for anything on this platform. And as much as possible, we will not go that way. This is not an economic framework. It is not designed to manipulate you to get any monies out of your pockets in any which way. What we are not. This is not a platform designed to showcase any man's competence. Even when we open up for dialogue, the objective of the dialogue is to allow us to kind of spy into your capabilities and have a sense as to how we can pray for you, how we could think about you, how we could consider you, and how we could find ways and opportunities to give a greater vent to what you carry in God. More than that, your contributions on this platform, in terms of your dialogues and your ideas, it is also intended to kind of give a greater level of volume and mass and clarity to concepts that we share. At no point do we intend, neither me or anybody else who work or function as a core in this operation, we are not seeking to showcase any competence. This is not a soapbox for any one individual or any individual. Neither is this platform designed to satisfy anyone's opportunistic cravings. Because some people could join the platform hoping that if I speak a certain way and impress somebody, let's say from Australia, then I could get an opportunity to go to Australia. Maybe if I speak a certain way and impress somebody down in Botswana, I could get an opening to Botswana. This platform is not designed to satisfy any person's opportunistic cravings or to stroke any person's egotistical leaning. This platform is not designed to satisfy your ego. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine normally says, leave your ego at the door. When you join this conversation, leave your ego at the door. What we are not. This is not intended to provoke rebellion against any systems that you are currently aligned to. Some of you have relationships. Some of you are part of organizations. Some of you are part of networks, and you are part of relational orbits. We are not committed to provoking any rebellion against any system that you are currently aligned to. If you are a part of a local church, whether you're a member or a pastor, we encourage you to remain loyal to that. There are very, very, very provocative conversations here, but we are hoping that you will be wise enough not to be insulted, but to be provoked. Make the adjustments where necessary, but we are not committed to provoking rebellion against any system, whether friendship, whether networks, whether apostles, whether prophets. We are not seeking to create rebellion against systems that you are currently aligned to. However, we will make no excuses for inciting a revolution against positions that are injurious to the advance of God's purposes in the earth. Now, read that correctly. We're not provoking any rebellion, but we are very deliberate in inciting revolution. In other words, we want whatever position, whether it be mental, doctrinal, relational, and otherwise, we want those positions to be broken down so that the purposes of God could move across the earth and in your life and in my life without hindrance. That's important. Now, that is what we are not. We could expand on this, but I think 4 points, they are sufficient for the moment. What are we? What then are we? I'm going to identify 8, and then please follow this. We will still send it out to you. 1, this platform is intended to be a conversation portal for the dissemination or the broadcast of biblical truth that are relevant to our contemporary times. That's important because we are not concerned about flattering anybody with just nice biblical ideas. Listen, disputes will be beneficial to no one. Even when we open up for dialogue, there will be some of you who may not agree. But even in your voicing of disagreement, we don't want to get into a whole bunch of disputes and where we are back and forth and we are trying to impress somebody else or break somebody other ideas down. That is beneficial to no one. What we seek to do on this platform is to create a conversation portal for the dissemination or the broadcasting of biblical truth that are relevant to our contemporary times. Let me expand on that. We also seek to peek into the next or the emerging frontiers of kingdom realities. So not only are we speaking truth that we believe are relevant for today, there's a lot of stuff we can talk about. There's a lot of biblical stuff we can kind of have conversations around, but we want to kind of remain focused on those areas that are relevant, that are actionable, that could be executed, that could be walked out and animated inside of our current age and time. But listen, we seek also to peer into the next and emerging frontiers of kingdom realities while being very deliberate in avoiding religious languaging, church-centric packaging, and terminologies that trigger reflexive patterns that have proven to create cobwebbed religious thinking. Now take note of that because it's deliberately written. So you realize on this conversation, in the past, you'd realize that there's a certain deliberate languaging. There are terminologies we try to avoid because those terminologies, they trigger reflexive patterns. They trigger ideas. It almost makes you relax because in your mind, I've heard this already. So if I were to get on this platform and let's talk about the Great Commission, something in the languaging makes you relax and say, well, oh, he's going to talk about Matthew 28. I know this already. And it almost like shuts down your thinking capability. And so we are very careful. Listen, let me read it again. We also seek to peek into the next and emerging frontiers of kingdom realities while being very deliberate to avoid religious languaging, church-centric packaging, and terminologies that trigger reflexive patterns that have proven to create cobwebbed religious thinking. That's one of the reasons why we are here. We have a compelling preoccupation to be relevant, and not just relevant in any arbitrary way. We have a compelling preoccupation to speak the word of Christ and to represent Christ. That's an important statement, a compelling preoccupation to be relevant in Christ. Number 2, what are we here for? This must be a spiritual food source. And I use the word food source in a broad context in doctrine, practices, and behavioral patterns. Now, I know that this is just a virtual platform and you can't see me. And the only access that you have to me on this portal is via 2 hours on a Thursday. And so we do have to consider relationships on a broader level that we can at least spy into people's lives, examine their existence, and make sure that doctrine connects with behavior. But we want this to be a spiritual food source, doctrine, practices, and behavioral patterns for foraging ants. I'm using the word foraging ants, which happens to be you and all of us, people who go out in search of food. So if you are searching for food, you're looking for spiritual food source, we want to make this as an available food source, not the. We don't hold to exclusivity. This is not the only one. There are very important and excellent platforms available out there. I know every Sunday morning, Abraham John has a very excellent platform that some of you should join, be a part of. This is not the spiritual food source. It is a spiritual food source for foraging ants. You are looking for food. So what do we want? After finding food here, you should take it back to your colonies and bring value to those to whom you are joined. I put foraging ants in inverted commas because the image is like an ant going out in search of food. Having found it, he does not consume it on himself. Every ant has two stomachs. With one stomach, he feeds himself, and the other stomach, he stores food for his colony partners. And that's an attitude that we must all possess. Don't come on this platform and enjoy the content to yourself. Become a foraging ant. Have two stomachs, one for yourself and one for your friends. Somebody must get benefit from what you're getting benefit from. So this platform is designed to be a spiritual food source for foraging ants who, after finding food, will take it back to their colonies and bring value to those to whom you are joined. Take it back to your churches. Be wise in how you share it with your friends. Let's create a revolution, the proliferation of kingdom ideas that will just spread without us trying to control it or manipulate it. You share it with your friend. We don't need to know your friend. Your friend doesn't have to become a member because we have no membership. But let your friend, you take it and spread this thing like a divine wildfire as best as we can. Number 3, why are we here? This platform serves as an olfactory reset. What is an olfactory reset? I'm going to describe it shortly. This platform serves as an olfactory reset to recalibrate, to rehabilitate, re-energize, and authorize people's calling in God so that they can function with renewed enthusiasm without the millstone of religious biases. What is an olfactory reset? You've heard me say it before. If you were to go to a perfume store and you, let's say you smell a nice Paco Rabanne. I went old school. For some of you who old school, you get a nice Paco Rabanne. And you smell that, whether they spray it on your wrist or they put it on a little piece of paper and you smell it. In order for you to smell something else, you have to have a reset. And so they make you smell coffee beans. Why? Because if you smell something else, you would never be able to capture the purity and the potency of the next odor because the previous odor will bias your perspective. Understand that? So some of us have been lost inside of whichever little zone. And then you come on this platform and maybe you realize we are very deliberate in provoking you in a certain way. We push the envelope in certain areas, doctrinally and otherwise, and we do it deliberately. Why? Because we are seeking to create an olfactory reset where you can at least begin to smell something fresh and begin to hear something fresh and see something again, not being blurred and blinded and distorted by concepts and ideas that we have picked up along the way. As good as they might be, they have the ability to bias our ability to see, to hear, and to sense going forward. Very important. Why are we here? Number 4, this portal exists as a launching pad for awakening, empowering, activating, and mobilizing next tier leaders. Now, I put that term there and I hate the language. I hate the language, but I put it in inverted commas because it at least captures a little bit as to what I'm talking about. We want to activate next tier leaders, people who carry capacity, but they have no platform. They have calling, but they have no audience. They have capacity, but they have no one to stir and awaken them. They sometimes sit down in churches and they carry so much stuff in them, but no one is even sensitized to what they carry, or their leaders are insecure by their development. You would have been on this call a couple of weeks ago when we had a line with Cropper. And in talking with Dave Cropper, he talks about some of his early struggles to at least, I'm going to use the term almost find footing, or to find someone who could approve of, declare a sense of acceptance and acknowledge that there is something on him, and at least say, you know what, let me see how this thing could express itself on a global level where it ought to be. And some of us are like that. There are many Dave Croppers on this call and around the world. What we want to do is not leave a few persons controlling this conversation, but create a platform as a launching pad for some of you. Create opportunities, point you in the right direction, give you leadership and give you mentors who can at least help you along the way, who could stand, leaders and mentors, young people rather, who can stand alongside currently established leaders, who would be deliberate, that's the leaders that is, who would be deliberate in providing necessary nudges to help in you stepping into the next phase of your journey and purpose in God. So why are we here? We're going to create this, we're going to use this platform as a launching pad to awaken, empower, activate, and mobilize potential inside of some of you who can stand alongside established leaders and be provoked a little bit, be nudged a little bit into you stepping with greater gravitas and authority in the purpose of God as assigned to you. That's a very important aspect of this platform here. Very important. Number 5, why are we here? We seek to provide a place of help, coaching, mentoring, including reverse mentoring. What do I mean by reverse mentoring? Reverse mentoring is not where I know it all, and so I must tell you all that I know. Hear what? I don't know it all, and I'm very proud to say that. There are many areas in which I am an absolute numbskull. I have no insight, no awareness, no knowledge of, and so if I am sitting with you, I would be very open to hearing concepts that can mold my whole operation. Mentoring is not one-way traffic. Correct mentoring is two-way traffic. You learn as much as you teach. You discover as much as you help another person discover. And so we want to create a place of help, coaching, and mentoring, including reverse mentoring and one-on-one consultation to help leaders and others with building appropriate behaviors and systems for decluttering the complexity of their calling and to assist them in envisioning and executing the purpose of God as assigned to them. In other words, I envision that you as a pastor could come and say, can you help me? And we could pull together a couple guys who could say, let these guys work with you, help you in terms of contextualizing the vision as assigned to you, helping you in terms of what do you prioritize, what is important, where are the areas of your struggle in building your community. Maybe it is with the young people, maybe it is with the women, maybe it's with the men, maybe it's with your leaders or your elders. Let's see how we can help you to best execute the purpose of God as assigned to you. Now, in me saying that we could put together a team, you need to understand that the team we may put together will not include me. It may not include Frederick. It may not include any of the existing leaders, as well as it may include some of the core members of this group. But trust us that when we put together a team, it is one of the best we could put together to really help you in the execution of the call of God as is assigned to you. That's number 5. Number 6, why are we here? We seek to create a culture that speaks to safety and acceptance without the craziness of posturing, religious and emotional grooming, grandstanding, and inauthenticity. Let me explain that, because what happens in most Christian environments is that there's a lot of what they call emotional grooming. In most circles, what we call worship is nothing more than creating an environment that is most suitable for what we want to say. And it's not necessarily worship. It is what social science calls emotional grooming. And it is not something that church does, but people do it all the time. Emotional grooming is a part of the dynamic, but we are not committed to those kind of stuff, where you kind of manipulate an environment in order to do what you want. That is not what we are committed to. We're going to create a safe space here that you could share, you could talk, you could speak of your own issues, that you could trust people on this platform, that you could at least trust the small group that you have grown accustomed to and close to. Let's create a culture that speaks to safety and acceptance, not the craziness of posturing and religious nonsense, grandstanding and inauthenticity. Inauthenticity is a broad word. That's the stuff that breaks down trust and deceive and manipulate, and at the same time you betray. That's not the world we're going to create here. As best as we can, we're going to be real. That's a strong word. We're going to be real. We're going to be real. What do we seek to do? Number 7. We seek to create a trusted environment. We kind of rehearsing number 6, but expanding the word, to create a trusted environment where reflexive empathy is the norm. Reflexive empathy. No one has to be coerced into providing help and support for others who are inundated by situations that are beyond their immediate resource capability. I mean, while we don't take any offerings here, we don't demand anything from you, there will be, and trust us, there will be from time to time a situation or individuals who have found themselves in a perplexed place. Those individuals may not be a part of this conversation. It could be somebody in Liberia. It could be somebody down in India. But if we bring a situation and say, guys, let's try to help this person out, what we want is an environment of trust where reflexive empathy must be normal. We don't have to come and tell you, well, give and it shall be given to you today. We don't have to get into that kind of manipulative conversation. We don't need to beg you. We just need people to live with a certain level of reflexive empathy, just becoming normal and genuinely concerned for other person's needs. And that's what the Bible describes as true religion. True religion is not the extent to which you know the Bible or how high you lift your hands in your worship. It is the way in which you deal with the poor, the way in which you deal with people who are really in need. You can't tell them, God bless you, my friend, and they have nothing to eat. So we have to be able to live by that. And number 8, final principle in terms of who we are, we seek to create a place of relationship development where we can each amend and expand our relational milieu. That's a nice word, milieu. The word milieu describes your social environment. Expand your relational milieu, your orbit, your space, your friends. So we seek to create a place of relationship development without manipulation. I know of organizations, if you have to build a relationship with person A or B, you have to get approval from whoever is in charge. We are not doing that here. We don't subscribe to that. You are free to build relationship. You are free to do your pulpit exchange and invite people. Somebody connects with you or you hear someone on this platform that you feel a sense of affinity towards. Listen, go after them, build with them, draw life from them, connect with them, hang out with them. No manipulation takes place here because this platform is designed to create relationships where we can each continue to amend and expand our relational milieu. Very important. Hear me, hear me. We have to be decisive in terminating the prisoner's dilemma. That's a nice term, you know. Something we do here deliberately is always adding vocabulary. So we have to be deliberate in terminating the prisoner's dilemma. What is the prisoner's dilemma? There's another term from social science. Listen to what the prisoner's dilemma is. A prisoner's dilemma is a game theory where 2 relational agents will not cooperate even if it's in their best interest to do so. So some of you sitting on this platform, it is in your best interest to connect with a Dave Cropper. It is in your best interest to pick up the phone and call Matic and say, guy, listen, I listened to you and I heard you, my heart is joined to you. It is in your best interest. But prisoner's dilemma, a game theory where 2 relational agents will not cooperate even if it is in their best interest to do so, whether through a lack of trust, imposter syndrome, personal retardation, etc. You just don't know. Well, maybe Matic is too big for a small person like me. Maybe Anderson Williams wouldn't want to listen to me. You know, that kind of attitude, that's what they call personal retardation. So we have to build and expand our relational milieu. And in doing so, we have to terminate the prisoner's dilemma, where 2 relational agents refuse to cooperate, even if it is in their best interest to do so. On that note, I bring this little presentation to an end. Now we're going to send this out to all of you. And the reason why, as I said, it's being sent to you, I want you to hold us accountable to these issues. If ever you realize that any one of us here behaving like some kind of Protestant pope, I want you to knock that down, shoot it down, hit it down, and confront it. If ever you see us drifting into areas of Machiavellianism and manipulation, knock it down. If ever people are posturing themselves and trying to assert themselves and do all this soapboxing and grandstanding, knock it down. This platform is not designed for my benefit, it's designed for our corporate benefit. I get enormous value from coming here on a Thursday evening from time to time. I get enormous value. Just hearing your insights, hearing your perspectives, and even in me, taking time out to design presentations, because these presentations are not only for your good, I get enormous value. So that represents the objectives of this conversation. And so it tells you, at least gives you a reason why we are here. All right? Okay, let me just kind of open up for maybe one person might have a question or something that they want to ask. Let me kind of get out here. Anyone may have a comment or a question that you may want to ask. If there's no comment or no question, I'm going to turn this conversation quickly over to Kelvin. Let me turn back to Kelvin. Kelvin,
Yes.
Any comment? Any question?
No questions. Well, maybe perhaps the issue with, because there's a lot of territorial positioning when it comes to networks and things, and people may not take too kindly to people bringing them back to the quarters where they are aligned. And you mentioned about using wisdom. Can you kind of mention something a little bit about that? Because, say for instance, spiritual sons and fathers and all those kind of things. You have a plethora of arrangements and relationships. Describe how this doesn't encroach on any of that and how it's beneficial, even if people are in these kind of spaces.
Now, I did say there are two things, there are two very important points. One is that we really do not want to create rebellion. Truth was never designed to create that level of rebellion. Truth creates an overwhelming sense of wisdom. It creates an overwhelming sense of fear. It is very revolutionary. It is highly confrontational, and it will always interrogate your own biases. Truth will always do that. And so if you find yourself in a space that principles are shared here, and those principles are strongly opposed to some of the systems that you are involved in. Remember, the other side of the coin I said is that while we would not encourage rebellion, we make no excuse for revolution inside of whatever space where the purpose of God could be advanced. However, what we want any one of us to do here is to utilize wisdom. Wisdom would suggest several things. One, based on what level of ranking you have in an organization, how you take principles back to your church, your grouping, your network, your denomination, is very often based on the level of rank you have within that organization. If you come from this platform, and let's assume that you have a district that you superintend, or you have a certain geographical footprint that you have oversight of, or you have a local church that you are the leader of, then the way in which you take truth back, it will be a lot different than if you are just like the average foot soldier going back to a church. So if you're a pastor and you are taking these concepts back to your church, what I recommend is do not try to take concepts wholesale back to your community. You must at least know where your church is located. When God came to Abram and God spoke to Abram about moving, you'd realize the thing that God said, lift up your eyes from the place where you are at. God didn't just tell him, well, lift up your eyes randomly and walk. No, be familiar with your current location, because your movement is always determined by your knowledge of your current location. If your current location is deeply religious, intensely religious, and you are hearing very provocative kingdom truth, and you take provocative kingdom truth into your deeply religious environment, you will break that apart. So know where you're at. Lift up your eyes from the place where you are at. Be knowledgeable of your own flock. That's another scripture in the book of Proverbs. Every man must know the state of his own flock. If you are familiar with the state of your flock, it determines how you can take concepts in a piecemeal format and gradually bring them to a place of change. Don't try to make a gazelle out of your elephant. So take your time and turn that thing. Elephants are not very nimble. A gazelle is very nimble. And so in bringing about change, if you have a certain level of authority in your organization, then you have a certain lever you could pull to bring about change. Now, if you're a foot soldier, that's another story. If you're a foot soldier and you have a church that you attend and you are not a member of the leadership, then wisdom would suggest maybe taking a copy of the audio from this presentation and sharing with your pastor or your leaders with a deep sense of regard and respect. Don't tell them you foolish, you don't understand these and you know. Let's say, Pastor, I've been hearing some stuff recently. I really find it to be really provocative. Maybe you could listen to it and see what value you get out of it. I know the guys. I mean, if at all you get value from that, and you want to talk to the guys, I mean, I have a couple links. I could hook you up. You know, that's wisdom. Don't be confrontational. Don't be arrogant. Be very respectful. Present an audio. Maybe invite him to the conversation, because remember, we are not controlling anybody here. Neither are we concerned about populating this platform where we happy by seeing 500 people on here. So use some wisdom. And however that wisdom works, it could be by just maybe encouraging your pastor, sending a little note and say, Pastor, I really appreciate the value you bring, because you would not go to the church if you have not gotten some value. I appreciate the value that you bring. I really am encouraged. And just leaving you a little encouraging note to the bottom here, and just maybe put a little snippet, a little one statement of concepts that you heard here. Share something, not only here, but wherever you pick it up, you know. But those things are important. Maintain accountability, maintain respect, maintain loyalty as much as possible. But at the same time, don't go and disturb the thing without having the ability to bring about some level of amendment and change. And so those are some of the practical things. We could expand on that, but it's a very important question, Kelvin. So the changes that you bring very often is determined by the level of ranking that you have inside of the organization, right? Anything else? Any other question?
I have a thumbs up from Leon. Couple of comments in the chat of affirmation: accountability, responsibility, gentle kindness, regard with inner assurance, and wash before to be fresh. So this is from Anik Benjamin, I believe, and she also resonated with the knock it down, knock it down. That part there, yeah. So
yeah, man, knock it down, knock it down. I get, listen, in my space, for me personally, guys, listen, I hold nothing against anybody, any one of you. Listen, if you find any level of drift, some of you have my email, some of you have my phone number, some of you have my WhatsApp, confront it. You are free to put it in bold, uppercase. You're free to confront me on the most radical and straightforward in my face manner, all right? Do that. What I will not appreciate is if you have a problem and then you go and tell somebody about it and you create little confusion. Come to me. Come to me. I've always said to people, if I offend you, come to me. Come to me. And I promise you, those of you who know me, I'm the type who would say, man, listen, I really did nonsense there. I could have done that differently. Forgive me. Forgive me. I repent. I'm very quick to do that. And when I say I repent, I am not just throwing empty words around. I try as best as I can, to make amendments to my conduct and my behavior. All right? I ain't perfect, guys. I always tell people that I'm not perfect, but I really try hard. I really try. All right? Okay, these principles will be shut out to you, that you could walk with it, share with it, share it with others, so that every one of us could have a sense as to why we're here and why we're not here. All right? So, if there's no more comments, no questions, no comments, no questions. Anyone with a comment? Anyone with a comment? No comment? No comment. Okay. Then let me turn this mic over to Frederick Tobin. Listen, guys, Frederick has always brought invaluable contributions on this platform. I have I have always benefited from his contribution. It has always been rich, always strong, very well structured, extremely articulate, and very kingdom focused. And we are all the richer. I personally am the better for having Frederick in my space and to at least interact and call him friend. And so, Frederick, let me turn this microphone to you, brother. It is all yours. So the mic is yours, Frederick.
Great. Thanks very much, Anderson. As always, appreciate everybody on the platform and the journey that we're all taking to seek to ensure that in each of our lives, and both individually and corporately, there we can really manifest the kingdom and at the same time have that tick on the inside of us, knowing that we are fulfilling the Lord's will. Can everybody hear me okay?
Coming through good.
Smashing. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. It's today's presentation isn't so much of a detailed teaching. Can everyone see that? Let me know if you can see that.
We can see it clear. We can see it very clear.
Excellent. Today's session isn't really so much of a detailed biblical teaching. I'm not taking that approach. I'm taking a slightly different approach because I think it's a necessary one, especially in light of some of the things that Anderson has been talking about. And whilst he was speaking last week, some of these things came to my mind. There's things I've talked about before, but I thought, this is this particular thing that came to my mind, I thought was an interesting way of presenting to you the challenge of migrating from being called to called out. And it's more of a, I should say, probably more of a modern approach to that. So if we were going to title today's talk or discussion, it's whose reality are you living in? And it's drawn from 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4. Which I'm just going to read. It says, let me just get it up here. Let me get the right one. There we go. So if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Now, the reason I'm gonna I've put that as a sort of lead for the conversation and discussion is because I'm going to play a movie trailer, and I just want you to go move with me on this because I like the fact, one of the things I like about this group is that we are willing and open to bring in resources that help explain the direction we're going in. And so the trailer that I'm going to actually play is a very short trailer. It's 2 minutes, and it's based on a film called The Truman Show. If you have seen the film, great, because I'm going to be talking about it. If you haven't seen the film, I'm going to recommend that you watch the film in the context of what we'll be discussing today. So very quickly, before I play the trailer, could you quickly, in the reactions, just give me a hands up to say if you've seen the film or not? I can see it in the if you put your hands up, I'll be able to see it in the participants list. Right, we've got one person at the moment. Come on,
Frederick.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the name of the film, please?
It's called The Truman Show.
Oh, okay, The Truman Show. Okay.
The Truman Show. So if you've seen it, it's a film. If you've seen it, I just need you to put your hand up. So we've got 2 people. Anyone else? Okay, so it just sounds like there's 2 people on here that have watched it. Okay. Anderson, haven't you seen it? You've not seen it?
Yeah, I've seen the Truman Show years ago, but I'm now trying to find how to put my hand up, so I'm struggling to put my hand.
That's not a problem. So,
but I've seen it.
If people have seen it but haven't been able to find the reactions to where to put their hand up, that's okay. But I'm actually going to be talking about that film, and I'm going to be discussing elements of it, which I think have it's an interesting way for us to understand it. So that's why I'm going to play the trailer, just to help those that haven't seen it get a sense of what it's about. And then I'm going to recommend that you actually watch it, because I think it's really important. Now, I think, as I mentioned, The Truman Show is a film which dramatizes the challenges of what I think of journeying to a place of being called out. And what's interesting about it, just like many things in life, is that stories have a way of helping us to reflect on the challenges of our own journeys, and the wrestling of our own journeys. And it's one of the things I've always talked about before is this idea that being called out is different from being called. And it can be seen within the context of the wrestle from Jacob to Israel. It's this idea of a change in one's identity that has an impact with the wider landscape which you have been called into. You know, one of the things about the Lord in terms of patterns within the Old Testament to the New Testament is we are called out to go in. We are delivered from to possess. And delivered from to delivered to possess. So in other words, there's a cycle there amongst the generations of men that is consistent throughout Scripture. And so being called finds its fullest expression in being called out, but there's also ascending in. So I'm going to play the trailer, so bear with me. It's 2 minutes, so it is short, and then I'm going to get into some of the things around the film and why I think it highlights some key things for us to get some learnings from. So.
Years ago, the Omnicam Corporation created the ultimate reality-based television experience, The Truman Show. Beginning with the child's birth, they set out to document an entire human life. Every single moment broadcast live to the world. They created his hometown of Sea Haven. All of it completely enclosed within the dome of the Truman stage.
Cue the sun.
And even though The Truman Show has become an international phenomenon, Truman himself has never learned the true nature of the world around him.
It's television! Yes!
Despite some close calls. Every aspect of his life has been carefully scripted and meticulously crafted. But the one thing no one could predict was who Truman Burbank would grow up to be.
Good morning!
Morning!
Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. I hereby proclaim this planet Trumania of the Burbank Galaxy. Trumania, Trumania. I love and honor you.
Right, was everybody able to see that?
Yes.
Awesome, brilliant. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to, my internet is very, very slow. So let's see if I can sort that out. Right. So, a couple of things just to be clear about the film, if you haven't seen it, is the film is essentially about a corporation that essentially owns a man who is literally born in a studio set. The studio set is massive. It's literally a world. And he's born into that studio set and has no idea, as far as he's concerned, as he grows up, that set is his reality, okay? And so everything around him, everybody around him knows that that world is not real. And literally there are cameras rolling 24/7, day in and day out, that is then essentially shared with the rest of the world, watching him grow up from being born into adulthood, watching him grow up in this environment that's been shaped around him, this reality, which is actually an illusion. And so that is the fundamental premise, the backdrop of the film. And so the film explores his journey in terms of waking up to the fact that he's in something that is essentially a show. And it's the gradual waking up. It's not necessarily something where something happens and it contributes to the crashing of the entire world. No, rather, he progressively begins to see the cracks within that world, and he progressively becomes curious to the point where he begins to investigate, and in his investigation starts to come to these truths. And in the midst of that, he begins to change. He begins to realize that the person that he has become in that world is not real, because that world is not real. And so there are parallels there that we can learn about when it comes to us awakening to the kingdom and the impact of that on the world that we live in. And that's not just the kingdom as well, or the world we live in. That's also, as we've discussed many times, the issues of religion, which are also part of that world that has limited our potential. So with the Truman Show, it's really about a man who is wrestling to discover the truth, but in so doing, recognize that there is a potential in him that needs to be realized that this illusion is not going to realize. Does that make sense to everybody? Kelvin, Anderson, does that make sense?
Indeed it does.
Awesome. So there's some interesting parallels, and there's some things that we can extrapolate from such a film that helps us to reflect on some of our challenges, as also when we reflect upon scripture and we see the archetypes in scripture and their challenges. So Truman is a man whose life is a fake one, okay? I liken it to when Paul says, after he discovered the kingdom, he said, everything is done. It's like this, there's a reality check that everything he had become up to that moment of being separated from his mother's womb was essentially fake. It was done. It was crafted within an entire environment that wasn't real. And in essence, Truman himself, living in a massive studio with hidden cameras everywhere, all of his friends and people around him, they're all actors who play their roles in various TV series around the world. And Truman thinks that he's the only one that thinks he's an ordinary man with an ordinary life, but he has no idea of how he is exploited until one day he starts to begin to find everything. Okay? In other words, the truth becoming a reality to him on the inside begins to highlight the cracks on the outside. All right? And I think there's parallels there for us. And so what this comes down to is this idea about appearance versus reality. Essentially, the appearance versus reality motive is about the difference between what the world appears to be and what it really is. So, for example, a small town may appear to a visitor to be full of sweet, wholesome country people who are too innocent to understand the ways of the corrupt world around them, where in fact, this town may be peopled by knowledgeable, possibly crafty people who could thrive in any environment they choose to live in. So this is something that, Truman began to discover in the town that he lived in. What it presented to him and what it really was were two very different things. And so in his discovery, he realized that appearance and reality are very, very different. And there are truths that trigger the difference between appearance and reality. And for many of us, actually, especially living in the current world we live in, which is very much focused on appearance, very much focused on the outward man, there are things that come up that highlight that this world is very much an appearance of something, but it's not the reality. And often truth exposes the darkness of the appearance and the smog of what the appearance does. And that behind it, there isn't actually much. In the Truman Show, it appears that Truman lives in a benevolent, peaceful world. In fact, his world is a prison that relies on the fact that Truman does not know he's a prisoner. The lovely small town of Sea Haven actually turned into a prison when Truman makes his escape. Now, one of the things you'll see if you watch the film is that he literally, the Sea Haven, which is the town that he lives in, moves from being something, it really does become a manifestation of his discoveries, because it starts very peaceful, starts very secure, starts very safe. But as the more he discovers about the truth of the world he's living in, that appears safe, appears secure, appears lovely, appears peaceful, the more he discovers the truth, is the more that world changes in front of him. The more conflict comes into it, the more disdain comes into it, the more difficulty comes into it. In other words, the cracks begin to appear. And so where an environment that was supposed to be safe for him ultimately now becomes a prison for him. It begins to stifle and impact his potential. But these are things that he is having to discover. These are things that, whilst others have tried to tell him along the way, it's what he discovers that actually makes a difference in terms of his migration and him moving into what I would call a called out position. And so it's really important that we understand that. There's some parallels in some of the names within the film, which I think are very interesting. The first being that Truman actually is parallel to True Man. Burbank, which is a city in California where television is produced, so it's actually a place. So it's a real life city, and the nickname is television capital of the world, and it's near Hollywood. And so interesting, True Man is the only true man in television. So it's the idea that everything else is false and is an appearance, and the real person in it who hasn't discovered that is the only real person in it. And then also the producer, the person that has created this entire mirage, has created this environment for Truman to grow up in. He's called Christoph, which is obviously linked to this idea of being some form of God, and we'll put it in the lower case G, who's created this environment and dictates this environment, but is an unseen hand crafting the life of Truman in this environment. And then finally, Sea Haven, the sea in it represents Truman's fear, whereas Haven is a place of safety. So it's very interesting that the town of Sea Haven is surrounded by sea, and Truman fears that because of events. I won't go too much detail, but Truman fears that because of the events that have taken place in his life. He fears going into that sea. And so he's firmly rooted on the land as a haven. That's why security and safety become really paramount to him. It's only as he begins to discover the truth of this environment, this apparent appearance of a world, that he begins to see that in that truth, that what was a haven is actually a prison. So I've mentioned Truman equals True Man, but the show itself is not directed by, but created by. So it's this idea that it's, whereas we often used to watch programs that were directed, in this context, it's created because the entire world is around this man. And so Christoph is an allusion to God as a creator, but he's certainly not God in terms of the symbolism. A character in the film known as Merrill actually says that that life on the Truman Show is truly a blessed life. So this is the other element to it, that the Sea Haven, the environment that's been created for him, he is constantly communicated that life is the best life, that it's a blessed life to be living in. And so there isn't anything else to search for. So he's caught between the fear of leaving Sea Haven, but at the same time, he's attached and connected to the reinforcement that there's nothing better than Sea Haven. And so that's the dynamic that his world lives within. So at any point, you see early parts of the film where he seeks to go beyond the boundaries of Sea Haven. The fear is introduced to keep him there and to limit him. And then at the same time, there are characters around him reinforcing the security, safety, and stability of Sea Haven. And he's locked within that pressure. also, what's interesting, when he does finally try to leave, he goes on a boat called the Santa Maria, which is the name for Christopher Columbus's boat. So it's this idea that there is a desire of discovery and of searching and exploring. And there is some representation in the midst of it, because he ends up in a storm, and the storm is crafted by this director to get him back to Sea Haven. And so there's a point in there where there's you could say an allusion to the idea of him suffering out across the sea, or suffering out of the sea, which in some instances can be likened to or symbolic to Christ. But I think it's very, very symbolic. It's not true attachment. And there's even a point where he seems to walk on water after hitting a wall, but actually it's more so about, in that scene, it's more about him discovering the illusion in the fear that he was held by. And so you can only go so far with some of the narrative in the story. There's also other parts in the film, for example, where he hears for the first time the voice of the director, who's in the position of acting as the creator. And that a director is imposing upon him this idea that within this whole illusion, he's the star. And that's what should keep him there. It's this idea of how can I manipulate him to keep him within that story to further the production's value across the rest of the world. And so we've got to realize within this film, there are people watching, and they're watching to see whether or not Truman is going to leave this world, whether he's going to pay the necessary price to wrestle out of this false reality, and indeed truly find himself within it. At the end of the film, he climbs this sort of stairway, which is likened to a stairway to heaven. And in effect, there is a sense in which he's got to cross over into something else, another life. And that life is fearful to him because he doesn't know any other life. He doesn't know anything beyond the expression of Sea Haven. And so there's a further exploration. It's not just enough to break free from the life you know and you've grown up in and you've been fed, but there's also another life to have the courage to enter into. And so for Truman, it's only what you see in the story is it's only when Truman is willing to die for what he believes, by disrupting and breaking away from the reality that's been created to hold him, can he discover a reality that's consistent with who he is becoming. So there's this balance between who he's becoming on the inside as a result of his discoveries and his willingness to disrupt and break away from the reality. And the interesting thing about the way the film is done in a very sort of, it's a comedy. So it's done in a manner which will have you laughing at some points throughout the film, because Jim Carrey, who's the lead actor in it, is quite a funny man. But below that is this current of realization that for all of us, that actually we have become satisfied with the world that we live in. And we've actually grown up in that world and we've been fed by that world. And so we've become satisfied with it and we look for safety in it and security in it, when in actual fact, it's actually a prison for us that does not allow the full emergence of that which is even greater on the inside of us. You know, scripture talks about he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. So in other words, in this phase of being called out, we must exercise that truth that him who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. And that has to be tested, it has to be trialed, there has to be difficulty in order to see Christ emerge, in order to see the Hugh Thesia emerge, in order to see the King of Kings emerge, in order to see the manifestation of a kingdom that enables us to not only fully disrupt, but start to move to a place which is what I call creating a new reality, a different reality that others can be engaged with. And so this is really the first stage when you watch the Truman Show. This is the first stage of a man moving into a called out position by wrestling with the world that he's so used to, and needs to figure out how to overcome it. Not to take it over. This is not about a man who wants to ultimately sit in the creator's position and dominate the world. No, this is a man who recognizes a futility within that world that he's grown up with, really begins to see it as dung, and is prepared to overcome the illusions that have been used to keep him in fear, overcome the illusions of the security blanket that has been put there to reinforce safety, and in order to push out, be really courageous and find and discover himself in the process. So this is actually, this interesting thing about the film is it's not a traditional savior motif where the character is given the characteristics of Christ or God, so that the audience or reader can see that he has sacrificed himself for the good of others. That's not the emphasis of the film here. Rather, it indicates this is what happens when man plays God. Because the television station, and therefore its representative, Christoph, who's adopted Truman, he's the son of the creator of his world, and the illusion that linked Truman to Christ are to indicate that he's a pawn in the master's plan. It's not that Truman is divine, but rather a true man in the artificial world that's been built around him. So there's something about the fact that the calling out into the kingdom, the ecclesia and citizenship, is really a calling out to disrupt, to resist, to overcome the artificial world that's been created around us. Previously, I've talked about world engines, that this idea that Babylon in a spirit constantly creates world engines that men live within and propagate and continue. And what happens is each world engine has limitations on how long it can last. We see that prophetically in the book of Daniel. And so many of us are living in city-states that are essentially on the demise. They're artificial worlds. They're coming apart. They're loose at the seams. And for many of us, the desire will be, the carnal desire will be to go towards the safety, the security, and the comfort. We're not recognizing that these disruptions and the breaking down of these artificial environments are actually there to make room for the calling out and for the kingdom to manifest. And so there's that tension there, but we can see some of this dramatized in this film. Christoph himself, the creator of this entire environment, is in the position of being technically a bad god, because he uses fear to control his creation. Christoph imposes the fear of water on Truman in order to contain Truman's universe and to keep him small. Truman, by going through the door into nothingness, faces down his creator and becomes a creature of free will and independence rather than the unknowing laboratory experiment he has been since birth. That's the thing about this. Everything around Truman is created, but Truman himself, Christoph, did not create. He adopted. And so the Truman is the true man in the midst of that environment. And then it's not Truman who needs his creator in this instance, rather it's the creator who needs his creation. So what we mean by that, remember I'm saying here that the creator is not our creator God, rather the creator here is the producer. And so in other words, it's very much likened to the God of this world who actually needs us in order to propagate the systems of the world, to propagate the artificial realities, because without us, those artificial realities fall to the ground. And we see that in evidence in the New Testament. We see it in the Old, but we also see it in the New Testament. Whereas people were released into the kingdom, the idols that represented the connection points of these artificial realities crumbled, and those artificial realities crumbled. And you see that in Ephesus. So it's important for us to recognize that we are needed within these artificial systems, these artificial worlds, more than we need that world. And so this is something that's very interesting for Truman, because he's going to journey into a place where he truly becomes one who is free and able to live in a completely, realize a completely different potential. Truman's fear of leaving this invented world once he realized it is a fraud is similar to our own reluctance to break our symbiotic relationship. Now, in this case, it's with media, because I extracted this from a presentation. But let me say this. His fear of leaving the invented world, the illusion, and its fraud is similar to our own reluctance to break our symbiotic relationship with the world and also with our religion. And even in some instances, our theology, which attaches us to our religion. So there's something about being real with ourselves, about the fear that has been programmed into us that says to discover anything outside of your theology, not Christ's theology, but your theology, to discover anything, to go and explore and discover anything outside of that is dangerous. So stay within your safe, secure theology crafted by the environment you were artificial environment you were raised in, that is actually an illusion. And even though you know the theology is not working for you, you still hold on to it dearly because there's nothing else to hold on to. And so we see this in this issue of his symbiotic relationship with the world that was invented around him. But his growing suspicion that what he is seeing is staged for his benefit is also our own suspicions as we see the things fabricated around us begin to break down. You know, I'm living in a country right now where the authority and the government is an absolute mess, and incompetence is now fully revealed, you know, and people respond in different ways to that. Some people respond as, we've got to do something about it. We need the government. They have to be there. And they've lost the fundamental understanding that it's the people that create government, and government has existed because it was created by people. So we're in interesting times across the globe when we start to see the failings of these systems, because for many of us, the truth is how real is the illusion is going to depend, is going to show up in terms of how we react to it or how we respond to it. We can talk a big talk about the kingdom, but the truth is when we lose something from the invented world, when there's an impact on us, how we react and respond is really going to be telling as to whether or not we truly believe that the kingdom's real, and the truths that we've come to understand are real. Because if we don't want to unplug from our symbiotic relationships, well, that will manifest. And one of the things, as I mentioned here, is that the movie depicts such a change in attitude, as a transformation in the way Truman sees his surroundings and as a physical journey. You know, it gets to a point in the film where Truman is bold enough to challenge and to test the environment and go against the grain, and just to see the imperfections. So it's not just that he's seen the imperfections and that's it. He's also pushing to create the imperfections, pushing to see the cracks worsen, just to prove to himself that yes, this is not real. This is artificial. And so if it's artificial, then actually there must be something that is real. And then the other thing about it is the movie also depicts the critics who invite us to see through media illusions in the form of characters who try to warn Truman he's on the television. So in other words, there are people that come in, and they come in as actors into the show, but they try to warn Truman of the truth, that he is in a show, that this is not real. And so you see throughout his life, even when he was a baby, at different points things happen to buttress that, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that he has to take responsibility. You know, and that I've seen it so many times where I've shared the kingdom with people have shared the kingdom with me, but ultimately, if you're not curious enough to take responsibility and to charge that truth, go with it and see where it goes, then what happens is you'll end up wrapping yourself in your own comfort blanket, your own safety and security, and blaming everybody else, especially when the world doesn't go the way that you want it to go. So I've got a couple more slides, but what we see in the film, and that's why I would encourage everybody to watch it. And for those, I'm sure, as I've been talking, you can remember certain scenes within the film, is that Truman's does reflect a bit of a called out journey. You know, there was an awakening. And it's interesting because the awakening you saw in the trailer where he was in front of the mirror with an astronaut, you know, that he'd sort of with his finger put out on the mirror, and he was imagining himself not there. That's the key issue here. The key issue is he begins to realize that he begins to decide to take a journey of discovery and recognize that what's there in front of him isn't quite it, and there must be more than this. And it's in that process that an awakening begins, and which behind that follows with a curiosity. He begins to inquire, and then that moves to investigation and trialing, and then finally challenging and disrupting. You know, and I think that that for me is a really good way of showing his story arc within the film. And the fact that in order to break fully with the reality that's been created around us, this illusion that's been created around us, we must take the full journey. We can't think that along the way that curiosity is enough or investigation and trialing is enough, because that's the thing. One of the challenges is that when we discover as we go along that we can connect with other people who are also on similar journeys, we can stop along the path. We can stop where the sign says investigation and trialing. We can stop there and huddle together and go, oh, brilliant, we've arrived. Truth is, we haven't arrived because we're not challenging and disrupting it, anything about the environment around us. And so I really do believe that the way that the kingdom works in our affairs, and I think you can take this and map it out across the archetypes of the Old Testament and New Testament. You can look into Abraham's life and see this. You can look into Moses' life and see this. You can look into Joshua's life and see this. You can look at David's life and see this. You can go the way through and see an awakening that leads to curiosity, then an inquiring, then an investigation and trialing and testing, and then challenging and disrupting. Now that gives room for others, but it's imperative that we understand that we have to own that. We have to own that. And there's a personal sacrifice in it. There's a carry your own cross in that personal journey to do that. So Truman and the audience depict us. There's parallels within the story where the villains and the victims and the hero of the Truman Show, where we can see ourselves, and ultimately the only illusions then we have to escape are the ones that we create for ourselves. And there's always a danger that we can do that. We are capable of that. I don't believe God wants us in that context. I think the truth is there to set us free, and that freedom is in the liberty of serving Christ and his kingdom, and really addressing the fundamental problems of this, of bringing down the illusions in this world so others can be free. The Truman Show movie offers us a metaphor of our own situation. The fake landscape Truman lives in is the reality which both the world and religion has created. It's a world made up of pre-designed theatrical illusions, which only the revelation of the kingdom can challenge. We, however, must be willing to pierce the illusion by investigating, challenging, and disrupting the theater around us. And this will reveal to us the truth of the limitations of the illusion and open us up to the realities of the kingdom of God. And so I'm going to land on the text I started with, and I've just added something there from a perspective that I think Paul was talking about here. And he's mentioned in other texts. So we know that when he says the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, but how does that work? Well, it's by creating an illusionary world designed to satisfy our carnal desires using fear, safety, and security, in order so that we cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. So in other words, as soon as the revelation of Christ begins to bubble up on the inside of us, we begin to challenge that illusionary world, but we have to go the whole way to be called out. We have to wrestle with it in order to see the fruition of it. So I'll end with this. Anderson often provides homework. Well, I'm going to give you some fun homework, and that is to watch The Truman Show and come back to me on what you thought about it, or come back to us on what you thought about it if there's some room to discuss it. And also that I'll share the original presentation that I got actually, which helped online to take you through it. So that's me. I'm going to open it up for conversation. So Kelvin, over to you.
Okay. You all know how this goes. What did you hear? What did you gather from what you heard? What would you like to share as a result of what you heard about the Truman Show? The realities of reality and fiction, those things, and how it relates and compares to the kingdom, the transition. This Frederick talks about being called out, that experience, and paralleling it with the movie. Any thoughts? I didn't see the movie, but I'm encouraged to. I'd like to check it out. Really want to see that, and to kind of bring more, put meat on the bones for the presentation. It's a very good presentation, even without seeing the movie, but some of those tendencies of being trapped inside of something that we believe is normal and a custom for us. Welcome, Lillian. You have the mic for your comments.
Hi. I deliberately did not see. Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. Hi, everybody. I deliberately didn't see the Truman Show because I don't know. I just don't like Jim Carrey's kind of humor. So, but now that you're giving this in depth, I definitely can watch it. Where can we watch it? Because is it a Netflix thing, or do we have to? Is it on another streaming platform?
Yeah, you might be able to pick it up on. You might actually be able to pick it up on something like YouTube or maybe Prime. What I would say is this: whilst I don't necessarily generally watch Jim Carrey, and I'm not necessarily. I don't have an appetite for his humor. But this film is not typical with anything else that he's done. So
I see.
I think the way that it's been done and produced, it's a very different, it's a departure from what you may know from what he's done before.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That's great. All right. So, I think what jumped out at me, because I came in, later in your presentation, what jumped out at me was the storm. I guess that was part of the trailer. And so I knew that there was a storm in the movie as he's trying to resist against, this illusion. And that, that kind of speaks to me about, the seed sown in the parable of the sower. And then, when trials come because of the word, then, the bad ground kind of decides, okay, well, we know the story about, like, if it's not good ground, those trials kind of crush whatever, little bit of root that has germinated and whatever plant that has grown. And so, and that ends the story there. And for me, it's like, okay, well, if you're confronting that storm kind of comes, and we can think about our choices to challenge the status quo in our lives, and our choices to, question the illusion and feel at the sky, or at the emptiness, as it were, or the expanse before us, and see, what's behind this. That is us reaching out for truth, and also saying, okay, well, as I try to grasp for the truth and reach out for revelation of the kingdom, trials will come because of that and because of the truth. And so as things break down, it can intimidate us into going back, like you were saying. And that is, that can be, sort of it can be mistaken for confirmation that, maybe I should stay where I am, and maybe I shouldn't try to challenge this too much because I'm being punished for it. When it's not punishment, it is, I began to see that those trials that come because of the word as part of the digestive process for truth, where it's not just about the cerebral, or sort of the intellectual understanding of, like, okay, this is truth and I can agree with this truth. That trial that comes because of the word is sort of an opportunity to not only receive the truth on a deeper level, but to put it into action. And let me just stop there, because I think I've pretty much made my point.
I get what you're saying. I think we have to. I don't always think that we appreciate how powerful the illusion of safety, security, and comfort and fear are, and so often we can identify that we're wrestling with one thing, i.e., fear, because, like you said, if you step forward and suddenly you've encountered something or difficulty that's right in front of you. But sometimes we don't realize that we're not wrestling with just fear. We're also wrestling with safety and security. And that the thought patterns in our minds that say, I don't want to push, this is difficult, I don't want to push this, I don't want to go beyond the status quo, is also fear, safety, and security speaking. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Yeah.
And we see that in his trials.
Right. I guess what was the last thing I was gonna say? I can't remember now. I will definitely see it. Thank you so much for this.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Lillian.
Corrine?
I just want to say before Corrine comes, wanted to just say how sometimes our present reality, we cannot question what's going on until some normalcy or our accustomed space is challenged or it is threatened in some way, because people will remain where they are, because it's like, nothing is traumatic for the fish until he comes out of water. Then the trauma starts, So I'm saying there are people who are inside of this false reality that are not disturbed in any way because nothing is disturbing them. So when we talk about questioning our present state and reality, something has to happen to precipitate that, I believe. So just the thought I had there. Corrine, you're up. You still with us, Corrine?
Hi, yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. I don't know, it sort of just blew my mind, the idea of the environment being manipulated, and for that searching question and that comes from within the true man playing on the word itself. Especially in the past 2 years, where there were so many things that were funneled to us, and if you're not careful, you doubt the inner guttural feeling that you get, because everything else seems so real. And that issue of truth, that there's something that Abba puts in us that causes us to seek, and as true men, when we have our senses of are reinforcing our perception or whatever is happening in our culture, that we do not listen to that inner feeling. I don't know if I'm babbling, but for some reason,
you're making a lot of sense, because what you're, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that when you're living in an artificial world that is predicated on reinforcing its reality through your senses, it can be very difficult to remain in the truth and seek to override your senses.
Precisely.
And that's true.
And I think that the whole trusting what God puts in us and what he reveals to us through his word, and questioning, because there have been so much, I can think about some of the things that happened over the past years, 2 years, coming on 3, that is almost like you wonder if, am I going off the deep end? Am I really against the odds of what I'm seeing? And I guess it just sort of strengthens me on the inside to push past the grain. And that whole issue of pushing against what what is tossed against us, is the level of resilience that I think that God wants from us, to trust that, and words are not coming to me, but to trust what he has deposited in us, what he's showing us to be truth, despite when everything else, our sense of taste, touch, and feel is just contrary. I just thank you. I'm just excited. I just thought drop the mic.
If you haven't seen the film, I recommend watching it.
I've seen slivers of it. But I will definitely have a look for sure. Thank you.
Wonderful. Could I point out, I know Leon says he's seen the film. So Leon, can I just ask you to maybe share in light of what I've sort of talked about, maybe speak into that? I also know Ivan's seen it as well. Eric, your hand's up. Did you want to share something?
You know, by default, because the other two gentlemen who you just named didn't respond.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, I first wanted to say, Frederick, how much I respect your teachings. They are truly enlightening, and I know you get great appreciation for it, but I just felt I needed to say that for my own person.
Thank you.
As for the whole of the group, I mean, the members that are here, I've been active now, if not since the beginning of it all, and silently observing, as I like to do. I saw the Truman Show. It is an amazing show. As you said, it's not perfectly in line with all of his other works. And if we don't judge a movie by the actor as much as the premise of the show, it was an amazing show, and it does depict, as do other shows like a Matrix, where there is an illusion, and I feel compelled to speak about it because I am a living testimony to exactly what this group is created for. So to say that I would share a bit of my testimony, if you will, and I give God all the glory for allowing me to speak with His grace, that I was raised Catholic, and it wasn't even much of a raising. Back in 1972, in New York City, people just went to be baptized and confirmed, and that was basically it. So after I was 12 years old, there was nothing between 12 and 32, but I was Catholic, and growing back into it, I did exactly, you gave an exact imitation, and imitation's a poor word, a depiction of how you are being called out, awakened. You know, you create with curiosity and inquiry and investigation and trial, challenge and disruption before what I put down in my book is freedom. And with that, I received my freedom. I've been a kingdom citizen now for just 2 years. And it's the veil of darkness that the enemy still holds over all the children of God, that, you know, the children of God are very comfortable and in their homes or in their buildings. And until platforms like this get out there, it will not become known. And even with the stretch of revival that's been out for the last few years, it hasn't had any passion or zeal. I haven't seen it. So this platform of education might be what is required for the kingdom to stretch out. And I'm just eager and excited to see how much more diverse it can get, or how far out it can expand into the body of Christ as we know it, where, you know, there should really be no denomination, because Jesus didn't come to create a denomination. He came to create a people, you know, or a nation, as a kingdom is. So the denominations divided it. And as a non-denominational participant of my own rights now, I believe in what you guys are doing. I'm in full support of it, you know, to the death. And whatever, you know, I can continue to do as we do, just by listening and participating at this point, giving some vocal expression. I'm just here to encourage you, the group, what you do as the teaching does, and to state how on point you are with this particular teaching. And I believe there's more to be had from it with regards to unveiling the truth and the prison that we all, or not we, but Christians as a whole are living in behind the veil of darkness.
Thank you very much, Eric. Very much on point. I've often used the Truman Show as well as other films to, within my own community, to help understand parallels with the sort of journey into the kingdom. And often it just helps for some people, it switches a light on, especially where you watch it as a group and then you discuss it for a few weeks afterwards. And so there are these films that come out, not all the time, but they come out and they just help us to understand parallels and plot ourselves on our journey. So I reached out to Ivan and Leon. I'm not sure if they're still there because you guys have seen the film. Leon, I can see you great. Would you like to feed in on this?
Yes, hi, thanks, Fred. Listen, the movie, I think the entire content of your presentation just lends into what Anderson spoke about last week with regards to blue pilling and red pilling. Yeah. And I think we find ourselves in a current environment where, like you said, we're marching to a particular drumbeat, and and we do that because we do not know any other way. But what I found from my personal experience is that there's always an internal drive, always ask for the more. And I think that is the genesis of any form of departure into the kingdom. There has to be a passion and a hunger for in just the everyday humdrum of life. And I think the thing that we cannot deny is that when it comes to the kingdom, and I don't think we can ever dodge that bullet. Church has kind of made it very soft for your for your salvation. Just come to the front, give your heart to the Lord, and happy days. But the kingdom does not operate like that. There is a tremendous price that must be paid, and I think there is tremendous value in the sufferings that we go through. There's a definitive distinction when we come out on the other side, that we realize the value of the pain, in that it brings us closer to our Father. And for me, the abandoning religious Christianity has brought me into a relationship with God as my Father, and that's a relationship I never ever knew about. So the kingdom will, like Anderson said, it does not offer a discount. And if anything, I want to emphasize tonight in this group is that each one of you are going to have to pay the piper, so to speak. And I'm just using that phrase. But with that cost will come the fruit, an abundant fruit and an abundant life that is absolutely liberating. So I encourage you to continue to press into the more. Do not settle for the mundane, and you will eventually exit this arena and have life and life more abundantly. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Leon. I think it's interesting, isn't it, just to respond to that, when Anderson was talking about the red pill and blue pill, these are concepts that they're concepts that reflect awakenings happening in the world around us. And often by people that aren't necessarily coming to a revelation of Jesus as King, but there are awakenings to the fact that their world isn't quite what it should be, and there is definitely something more. And those are the sort of signposts that should encourage us. I think the challenge is that for many of those unbelievers who are blinded in their shaking in their sort of subconscious, they don't see Jesus as an option because the religion has reinforced Jesus on a cross that doesn't reflect anything more than that. And that often manifests within the context of our denominations. And so it makes it very difficult for those that might even consider looking our way to appreciate Jesus beyond what he's already known as and known for. And so that's definitely one of the challenges for us, is to push beyond the boundaries of our own safe spaces and security blankets and comfort, to seek for Jesus as King to be manifest, so that people can see him as he is, because then so are we. Anybody else would like to feed into the conversation? Okay, well, looking at the time, Kelvin, I'm happy to hand back to yourself.
Brenda has a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Frederick. You know, as you were talking about, you know, when you said that change goes beyond fear, but also safety and security, I would say that safety and financial security could prevent some leaders from accepting the truth, even if they see it, because, I mean, there's a cost to leaving, you know, some of these religious systems.
Mm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Frederick. Brenda just dropped the mic and walked off. So it was a mic drop. So
the mic drop moment.
Yeah, but yeah, there is, in fact, like what Leon said and what Brenda said, is a cost to this. And so much so, as I think Anderson may have mentioned a couple of weeks ago, if not last week, this idea of finding a pearl and buying the field, you know, buying the whole field. And while you're buying the whole field, you know, you get bramble bushes inside of that field. There's a number of things inside that field in addition to the pearl. So there's that cost aspect that really needs to be considered. So thank you, Frederick. Thank you.
You're
for
welcome.
Anyone else with a question or comment?
Let me make a few comments. Frederick,
Okay.
I find this Truman Show parallel. It's a very, very apt parallel, and it really gives us like a natural situation that can almost give us a view of the struggles that we go through in order to kind of find ourselves in a real kingdom space, as opposed to this phantom quality of life that religion has constructed for us. It has so many remarkable concepts inside, and I really want to encourage all of us here to go back and maybe look at the movie, identify the parallels, and maybe what we could do, even though I mentioned what we want to do next week. Listen, our conversations are not cast in concrete. And so though we would have already identified something we want to do next week, I think that there are other layers to this conversation that we need to at least uncork and explore. And so I want to suggest that we each go back, look at the movie, identify the parallels, and let's reconvene and have a real buoyant conversation. Hollywood always seems to have, there's a demonic side to Hollywood. And I'm going to define I'm going to describe what I mean by the demonic side to it. The demonic side to Hollywood is that it takes, it has this incredible ability to discover kingdom concepts even faster than churches do and spiritual leaders do. But the problem is that it masks spiritual concepts in a package of entertainment. And so we see in the Matrix an entertainment. We see in the Truman Show entertainment. And that's where the demonic side of it is, that we are entertained by concepts that should seriously provoke, and not only provoke, but push us to a place of more search and more inquiry, to the point where we really come out at the other end transformed. Now, I like the image as well that Frederick talks about in terms of this whole canceling of the next step because of securities. And that is so crippling, and it is a real situation, but way too many people settle, almost like the term that I would use is that they shrink themselves for another dollar. And in doing so, they compromise the purpose of God in their own lives. And not only compromise the purpose of God in their own lives, but they settle for the phantom as opposed to the real. And I say that because so much of that speaks into my own reality, because where I am now, the line of sight that I have now, I would say this started out of a very traumatic situation. But I could have been spared all of that had I responded to God, let's say 15 years ago or 20 years ago. But I would have had the same struggle, the issue of security versus responding to sight. And you weigh all of those issues in your heart about, well, how would I do this and how would I do that? And you know, this is the reality, that all of the questions you struggled with searching for security, when God throws you into a tailspin, those questions are suddenly answered through pain and through all kinds of other issues. So some of you might be right there. I would suggest that, you know what, look at what I call the pull factor. The pull factor is what is in front of you that God is calling you into, that is far more glorious than the world that you are now living in. I am currently writing a book on transition. And one of the points that I'm getting into is what I call the parable of the salmon. And it's a very interesting thing that the salmon begins this remarkable journey, not based on desire, not based on sight, not based on revelation. But when a salmon makes this journey from the Pacific to end up in some little river in Canada where it will die, that whole journey begins with what is known as a homing call, a homing call. Something calls it back home. And somehow all of us have that same mechanism built inside of our spirits. There's a homing call just to get back home, to kind of reconnect more powerfully with God, your Father, your Savior, your King, your Lord. And if we don't respond to the homing call, and a lot of salmons find themselves there, if they don't respond to the homing call, then the salmons become resident. And this is an interesting story. The resident salmons are those salmons who refuse to migrate, even though they're required to migrate. And this is what those resident salmon do. They live only to maintain the environment that they've grown accustomed to, not for themselves. They live to maintain the environment. And my question is, how many of us are residents, meaning that there is this homing call, there is this summons from the next realm calling you home, not to death, not to die, but calling you home. And we refuse to respond to that call, but the environment, the organization, the system, the church, the network that we've grown accustomed to, we find ourselves living there, not for our benefits anymore, but just to maintain the environment. And that's a deadly place to find yourself. And I think so many layers of this presentation today. It hits home to me. One, because it speaks to my own journey. It speaks to my own stupidity. It speaks to my own asininity. It speaks to my own foolishness. But at the same time, so many of us could be spared the turbulence that can follow your ignorance. Some of us could be spared that. That doesn't mean that it's a tiptoeing through the tulips and then you're just kind of wafting your way through new life. There will always be turbulence. There will always be a price to pay, but there are some price that you have to pay where you have to come to this critical understanding that I have come to. Listen, man, comfort is overrated. That thing sings in my inner core with such loudness. Comfort is overrated. And what we search for is something that is really so undervalued. And we find ourselves taking a morsel of soup, i.e. comfort, and surrendering our destiny simply because it makes us more comfortable. That ain't worth it at the end. I promise you, it's not worth it. I have said so many times, I would prefer living under a bridge and be pregnant with the purpose of God than to live in the lap of luxury and be blind to what God is doing and saying. So I'm going to hold it there. I see David has his hand up. So David, let me turn the mic to you.
Yeah, you know, this is a very provoking scenario, if I may put it that way, that Frederick has brought to us today. I would like to suggest, Andy, that we do delve into this next week a little deeper. There's one aspect that I believe is so hard for people to have to deal with. And it's when you have to tell yourself, I was deceived, I was in darkness, I was in prison by religion. And all of a sudden you have to tell yourself the things that you held on to so dearly, and in some cases you became a fanatic of, all of a sudden you realize it's all a lie and it's all darkness. And I've met hundreds of men and women around the world that struggle with that. They're still struggling with it. I think we ought to talk there. I think what you just said, and one of the reasons I didn't say anything earlier was because this is deep. And I believe that this is a real nerve, and there is room for some very, very good discussion. I would pray that maybe we could talk about it more next week. I'll leave this thought, I'll leave this provoking thought. The most diabolic part of religion is that it uses the words of truth to incarcerate you in their prison. So when all of a sudden you start hearing the truth, it's hard to admit it because you've been incarcerated with the truth, at least you thought. This is how unreal, but this is how diabolic the spirit of religion is. And so I think we ought to talk more about it.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think we agree on that. I think we will. As I said, this conversation, nothing that we do here is cast in concrete. So whatever plans we have for next week, we're going to shelve that. We're going to kick that to another week because we don't know how buoyant the conversation will be next week and whether we need to expand on it. So let's kind of for now say we're going to kick that that line that we had scheduled for next week. We're going to kick that up to another week. The other week we will confirm that eventually. So we're going to stick on this for a little bit and drill even further into it. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Kelvin, I'm going to turn the ball back in your court, man.
All right, thank you, Anderson. Thank you for laying out those 8 steps, and we'll get those out to our listeners as soon as we receive them. We'll get those out, push those out to you. And thank you for your attendance this week. Look forward to next week. Thank you again, Frederick, for your presentation as well. And we'll see you all next week. Bye for now.
Good night, all. Love you guys.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.